Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. October 13th, 2024. It's the afternoon in Bernalillo County, New Mexico. A neighbor dials 911, hearing multiple gunshots coming from the Mestre family's house next door.
Yeah, when deputies get there, it's clear pretty fast that something truly awful has happened.
Right at the center of it is 24-year-old Adlai Mestre, and the things he first said to the deputies, they were just deeply unsettling. Bizarre, really.
Totally bizarre. He apparently said his family rushed him with weapons, but then almost in the same breath, he's saying their wounds had healed.
And then he apparently mentioned shooting them in the head and watching them convulse. It makes no sense from the get-go.
Exactly. It's just this immediate jarring contradiction.
So we've been trying to piece together what we can about this case. Our main source for this deep dive is a YouTube video. It's from the Explore With Us channel called Cops Make the Worst Discovery of Their Lives.
And it includes police records, some footage that apparently hasn't been widely seen before. We should also maybe mention the title for today's deep dive. It comes from the Dark Stories podcast.
Good point. So our goal here is really to unpack the details we have from these sources, try to understand the sequence of events. And, it's crucial for everyone listening to remember this is an active investigation. Adlai Mestre is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. So let's start with that 911 call. The neighbor, Daniel, I think his name was, he said he heard 5 or 6 shots first.
Right, but that was apparently like an hour and a half before he actually called 911.
Yeah, which is odd. Then he heard one more shot about 10 minutes later. He also mentioned trying to text and call the family first, even honking his horn outside their house.
That delay, it does add a strange element to the timeline, doesn't it?
It really does. So deputies finally arrive. It's about 2:50 p.m., and the first person they see is Adlai.
And his interaction is, like you said, just weird from the start. He tells them his family rushed him in his room, his dad with a knife, his sister with a sledgehammer.
And then he says, "I killed it." Dad's specific phrasing, it.
Followed immediately by that claim about finding their bodies but their wounds having healed. It's just impossible.
That's the thing. That detail is so far removed from reality, it immediately flags something as being terribly wrong, even before they see any evidence.
You can see why the deputies would be, extremely cautious. They also noted blood on his hands.
Right. And his explanation for that was apparently that his father rushed him, he hit him, and then his mother said something like, "You need to die."
So they secure Adlai in their vehicle and then head inside the house.
And what they find inside, well, it tragically confirms their worst fears. The video footage shows pools of blood, smears of blood on the floor going up the stairs.
Just grim evidence of extreme violence.
And more than just blood, they find shell casings, a knife, and a mop that's covered in blood.
And there was some suggestion, wasn't there, about bleach maybe being used on the mop?
Yeah, the video mentioned that possibility.
Yeah.
Which, if true, could point to, an attempt to clean up afterwards.
There's also the really sad detail about the family dog. It was found injured.
Yeah, injured by gunshots, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It had to be euthanized later, which is just heartbreaking.
It is. And it also raises that grim question, could some of the blood they saw initially have been the dog's? It just speaks to the chaos of the violence.
It does, another victim, really. But the most horrific discovery was still to come. When they searched the backyard.
That's why they found drag marks?
Exactly. Drag marks leading away from the house. And at the end of those marks, they found the bodies of Adlai's father, David, his mother, Nancy, and his 17-year-old sister, Brill.
So his earlier statement about burying them, which must have sounded like just more rambling.
Tragically, it turned out to be true. He had apparently dragged their bodies outside.
Which leads us to Adlai's interrogation. The part shown in the source video, his behavior just gets more and more erratic.
Oh, definitely. He starts talking about seismic waves and cell towers, referencing landmarks like Big Ben, top of Seattle, as targets.
Yeah, and just these really disjointed stories, helping a woman pull coins out of her, out of somewhere private. Mentions of submarines, his family bowling and losing consciousness.
It's like a word salad, almost, completely disconnected from the reality of why he's there. He also apparently claimed he saw a major catastrophe happening on police cameras and thermal imaging.
It just paints a picture of someone whose mind is, somewhere else entirely, experiencing a profound break, it seems.
Absolutely. And it makes sense that the detective decided, look, we need to Mirandize him right now. Given his state, ensuring his rights were protected was critical.
Even after the Miranda warning, his explanation for the killings remained deeply disturbing and, frankly, illogical.
He said he had to kill them, but only after they lost consciousness, which again makes no sense.
And then that incredibly chilling, incomprehensible phrase, something like raising that half an hour eating body.
Yeah, just horrifyingly bizarre. And he also admitted to shooting the dog during this.
Adding to the physical evidence back at the house, they also found a bloody meat tenderizer.
Right. So the investigation moves forward, the victims are formally identified, and then comes the task of delivering this devastating news.
To Adlai's older sister, Nancy Jr., and also to Daniel, the neighbor who made the 911 call.
And their reactions, as you'd expect, were just shock, total disbelief. It underscores how sudden and unexpected this was for those who knew the family.
Nancy Jr.'s comment was particularly heartbreaking. She apparently said she expected Adlai might die, given his issues, but not the rest of her family.
Wow, that says a lot about the underlying stress and perhaps the known volatility there.
And then there's Adlai, back in interrogation, giving directions to where he buried the bodies, like specific details about a trail, gates.
Followed by that nonsensical reason. Lost consciousness, take pictures. It's that mix, again, moments of clarity or detail, then complete delusion.
And Nancy Jr. apparently shed some light on Adlai's references to possession.
Yeah, she said their mother had sometimes dismissed his problems using that term, possession.
Which could suggest maybe a lack of understanding within the family about the true nature, the likely mental health nature of his struggles.
It certainly points to a potential disconnect, adding another tragic dimension. This leads us straight into his documented mental health history.
Right. There was discharge paperwork from a hospital stay ending September 27th, 2024, so just a couple of weeks before the killings.
And it stated he'd been admitted for psychosis. He reported auditory hallucinations, men telling him to kill himself, women telling him to surrender.
And he said these voices had been going on for years, but he had just been ignoring them.
Which is, wow. He also apparently believed police had some kind of secret intelligence about his reality and expressed wanting to join the police academy. It's a really concerning picture.
And Nancy Jr., his sister, she confirmed he heard voices. She believed he wasn't taking his medication consistently.
Yeah, she said she'd found his pills in the trash sometimes and described his issues as a kind of schizophrenic break that seemed to have been building up, causing a lot of stress at home.
While he was left alone in the interrogation room at one point, his agitation just seemed to skyrocket.
The footage apparently shows him talking to himself, using names like Officer Angel and Bloodline Jesus.
And then giving commands to someone or something that wasn't there, like, Angel, open the door.
Yeah, suggesting he was actively hallucinating or experiencing delusions right there. It got worse, though.
He became physically distressed.
Extremely. He tried to urinate in the corner of the room, then got really frantic, begging to be let out, saying he was afraid of soldiers.
That increasing paranoia, the detachment, it's quite clear he was in deep distress.
And that distress culminated in violence. He actually kicked a hole through the drywall of the interrogation room.
Seriously, he tried to escape.
Apparently so. Deputies had to apprehend him again. And because the holding room was now damaged and maybe inadequate, they decided to secure him in a police vehicle instead.
It just shows the level of volatility they were dealing with.
So when you think about why this happened, what could possibly trigger such an event? Nancy Jr.'s thoughts about family arguments, maybe specifically with his teenage sister Brill over his medication.
That seems like a plausible stressor, especially given his mental state and her belief he wasn't taking his meds.
And then you have the stark contrast between Adlai's initial claim self-defense, they rushed him, and the actual evidence.
Yeah, the autopsy results really undermine that self-defense narrative completely.
They really do. David, the father, gunshot wounds to his arm, chest, and crucially, the back of his head.
Back of the head, that's not typically consistent with self-defense against someone rushing you.
Exactly. Nancy, the mother. A gunshot wound to her back, plus significant blunt force trauma to her face, and bruises almost everywhere.
And Brill, the 17-year-old sister, a gunshot wound to her eye, and blunt force trauma to her hand and face.
The sheer brutality and the nature of these injuries, it points towards something far more complex and violent than his initial story.
So based on all this evidence gathered?
Adlai Mestre was charged with, well, a lot. 3 counts of first-degree murder. 3 counts of tampering with evidence.
Plus the animal cruelty charge for the dog.
Right, extreme cruelty to animals, and also escape from custody for the incident in the interrogation room, and criminal damage to property for kicking the hole in the wall.
And again, just to be clear, as stated in the source material, at the time that information was current, he hadn't been convicted or sentenced. These are the charges?
Correct. Presumption of innocence applies.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, we're left with just this incredibly disturbing picture. Adlai's bizarre behavior and his conflicting statements from the very beginning.
The truly graphic crime scene, the documented history of severe mental health struggles.
And the absolute tragedy of the Mestre family being wiped out like that. David, Nancy, and young Brill.
It's devastating. And despite all the details we've gone through from the sources, there's still so many unanswered questions, aren't there? The full picture is elusive, leaving this profound sense of unease.
Which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe for everyone listening to consider. When you look at this case, the complex mix of mental illness, family dynamics, the sheer horror of the violence, what does it tell us about, I don't know, the fragility of normalcy?
And maybe about how unseen crises, these pressures building beneath the surface, can just erupt with such utterly catastrophic results.
Yeah, it really forces you to think about the multiple overlapping layers of tragedy involved here. It's a deeply unsettling story.